Welcome to another of our sporadic and intermittent on further reflections with Norm Allen. I'm Norm Allen, and on the screen with me is ErInn Oxford, the executive director of the Dale Ministries. And I'm excited to have ErInn with us today because we've been friends for 12 years or something like that. And I'm friends with her husband, Dion, of a longer period of time, but we share ministry in the city and ministry to people who have needs. I'm on one side of the street. I'm here in my little enclave in Orangeville, and ErInn is working a different side of the street with a different kind of person in her enclave in Parkdale. So before we start, I just want to offer an invocation that we use in some of our retreat material, just to sort of set the tone for our conversation. We come in these moments to God, in our need and bringing with us the needs of the world. We come to God who has come to us in Jesus and who walks with us the road of our world suffering. We come with our faith and with our doubts. We come with our hopes and with our fears. We come as we are because it is God who invites us to come, and God has promised never to turn us away. Amen. So I first met ErInn, we're guessing somewhere around 12 years ago when Touchstone still had what we called the sacred space, a condo down on the harbor front. And a person who was a board member of a ministry that she was involved in, directed by someone else, asked if I would have conversations with them about the future of the work. And it became clear to me, as an old geezer in the ministry world, that there were substantial change needed. There was little hope of survival. The building that they had wasn't likely going to be theirs much longer. The finances were a disaster. And the only person who really had clarity of vision and purpose was ErInn. And it was clear to me that she was the person, if it was ever going to go anywhere, would need to be invited to be the director. And so somewhere in that period of time, she was invited to become the director of this thing that had yet not become the Dale Ministries. And if you were to look at it, it had no visible means of support or hope of survival. And yet her story is one of those wonderful stories that, as a generation beyond her, in a sense, I get great encouragement from the fact that younger generations are finding their own way to do ministry, finding their own way to understand God and the calling in life. And older guys like me may be able to be an encouragement, but we really don't know how or what they're doing. It's just they have to figure it out themselves. And so ErInn's story for me is an inspirational story of a younger generation person who found her own way and has now been productively used to lead a ministry that has some significant depth and breadth of work in the area of Parkdale. So tell me a little bit about your background. You've been married for 25 years from a guy with that great Dion Oxford from Newfoundland, and you've got a daughter who's in university, just headed off to Europe for a period of time. So you've been doing cross-cultural communication with Dion for a lot of years because you kind of came from Lawrence and Young or Lawrence and Avenue Road or something. So tell a little bit about your background and how that may have shaped where you're at in your work today.
Oh, thanks, Norm. It is really nice to be here with you. So thank you for inviting me into this conversation. My background, yes, I was born in Toronto. People often look at me a little funny when I say that because so many people presume that people always come from somewhere else to live in the city. But I was born at St. Michael's Hospital and to Elaine and Barry Grant. I, as you mentioned, grew up around Yonge and Lawrence. So North Toronto, fairly affluent neighborhood. When I was 4, my brother was born, so 2 of us. And then when I was about 7, my parents made the difficult decision to divorce. And that had a huge impact on me, certainly all of us in various ways. Uh, One of the significant ways, I think, was that my mom became a part of a church community that was very aware of her being a single mom and made sure that we never went without. I'm quite certain there were times when they even paid our rent. Um, on the other side of that, my father, who was still very much involved in our lives, was leading a life of more affluence. And so it meant that I had sort of one foot in two very different worlds at all times.
So you, in a sense, people could immediately paint you as somebody who doesn't know about insecurity, but you had housing and food insecurity growing up to a certain extent as a younger person. And so even though you could be seen to be somebody who had a lot of advantages, you were not unfamiliar with challenges in life.
That's right. I mean, I think that there were times when I didn't even have to be as aware of them as some people end up being because of this safety net that we had in our church. And my father, who continued to contribute to our lives, certainly.
Right.
So yeah, I think you're right. It wasn't immediately obvious to people, and at the same time, it was very real.
So, so how does somebody go from, actually having a challenging life? And a lot of people coming out of that environment may say, okay, I'm going to do everything I possibly can to never experience insecurity again, and go into a faith ministry uh, that had, for a lot of time, a lot of difficulty looking like it had any secure funding or future. And so it is an interesting thing that somebody like yourself has gone into a different form of faith experience. And so talk a little bit about your journey from that upbringing to where you went to school and how you ended up working in this side of the world.
It was certainly not the trajectory I thought I would find myself on as a teenager. At the time, I was pursuing music or theater even as a career, and uh, and so was doing a lot around that. And then I was all set to go to York University to get a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Theater when and when I say I was all set, I mean, I had been accepted. This is now August before the September that I'm to go there. And for the first time in my life, I felt uncertain about that direction. It was unnerving. I didn't understand it. And I ended up visiting a friend who had attended Bible college. And talking to her, listening to her experience, I started to wonder if maybe that would be something I could do. If not forever, maybe defer my,
Right.
acceptance to York and do something different for a year, and then I would be back at what I understood and wanted, even, I would say. Ended up at what is now Tyndale. And it was during my time there that a number of things happened. I met Dion, that guy that you mentioned that I've been married to for 25 years.
Yeah.
And I also met a few individuals who had previous lived experience on the street, were now students at the college or at the seminary. And one of those people, Joe Elkerton, invited me to go downtown one night. This was something he was doing with great regularity, was just to walk around the downtown core with bagged lunches to offer people who were living outside. And I often say that I went down This was a new experience for me, though I grew up in the city. It was a new experience to do this specifically. We're armed with these bag lunches. And what was very disarming about the experience was how immediately at home I felt. And I remember specifically being in the parking lot of the Royal Bank Plaza. And there were a number of people who had set up little houses essentially made out of cardboard and sitting there connecting with people and thinking, I need to do more of this. And that was the beginning.
So these people attracted you rather than created fear or repulsion or whatever may be the various, people get very insecure with people who are different. So that's why it's interesting that you found them attractive and something different there.
I think we were able to immediately connect about some of the things that had been challenging in life. So though the challenges that I had didn't lead me to lying on the street in the way that they were in that moment, it felt like there was no need for me to hide that part of my experience. And then we also connected on, things like music and so on. But yeah, I certainly didn't feel repelled at all.
So now talk a little bit about, so you ended up graduating from Tyndale, as it turned out. And at some point you volunteered with Dion at Friendship Room. And then somewhere along the line, you ended up working in Parkdale with the organization that eventually became the Dale Ministries. So talk a little bit about that transition and how you ended up essentially were you a part-time staff person with the ministry in Parkdale, or were you a full-time?
By the time we were having conversations together at the sacred space, I was closer to full-time.
Right.
When I started in Parkdale, it was after a number of years of not working or working, but in a different way, staying home with my daughter. So I had been working at a place called Sanctuary.
Right.
Left there on maternity leave, decided that I really wanted to stay home with Kate until she was in school. Always thought that I'd return to Sanctuary, but I really knew that I needed something still pretty part-time and very flexible. And there was this opportunity in Parkdale, very part-time, that would include doing music. I discovered along the way that I could still incorporate music into my work. And also the person who was working there at the time we'd worked together previously. And so I knew that there was a similar, I think, philosophy and approach to ministry already happening in Parkdale. And so I was attracted to doing that. And so that was
what were the philosophical shapings of your understanding of ministry that ultimately have developed now into the Dale, but that you saw sort of in an incipient stage in the work that you were doing as a worker?
What I learned at Sanctuary and other places as well, but it was very formative, was the importance of placing at the core of whatever we were doing people who often weren't placed there. So making very intentional space for people who find themselves in the margins, that there was something very important about doing that, and that it was very revealing of the heart of God to value all people, of course, and those who were experiencing deep struggle. So that was very important to me. It was also very important for everything to be very relational. So to discover ways to do this kind of work, not just me being a staff person doing something for somebody else, but learning the ways in which we can give and receive together, the importance of that. So in a way, it was different than a lot of social service structures if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean,
And
so much of what we in the so-called helping side of the fence think is that I have to do to somebody or do for somebody. When, as we have discussed in the past, it's actually you actually help somebody when you allow them into your own life a bit, and they get to help you, and that there becomes mutuality to it rather than I got all the answers, or I got the money, or I got the sandwiches, whatever it happens to be. And so therefore you need to feel lesser because you're only a recipient as opposed to we're sharing something together. I mean, is that getting at what you're talking about?
yeah, I think so. I think it's really playing around with some of the power dynamics that generally exist, right? It's saying, you know, God has created a kingdom that's actually pretty upside down from the one that we're creating sometimes here on the earth. And so looking for ways to live into that upside down kingdom includes making sure that it's not just me giving, but it's me receiving, and that I can experience deep care when I do that.
Right. So let's fast forward to those times when we were talking about the future of the work and talk about your own understanding of God, where the spirit is in your life, how you make decisions. But, you know, like as I said in the introduction, I, as a sort of a further generation down the road guy, saw no easy way this thing was going to work. But I also saw in you a sense that there was something worth doing and worth fighting for and trusting God to move into it. I mean, I hesitate to use the old joke about, you know, the kid that goes out to the barn on Christmas morning thinking that they were going to get a pony and says, you know, well, with a pile of poop this big, there must be a pony in here somewhere. But, you know, you had that sense that the needy people or the needs of people were there. Some nascent structure was there. You did have a board and a couple of good board members. So talk about how something that shouldn't have worked ultimately has become a very fruitful thing 10 years later or 12 years later.
You're right
Am I
that it
over,
was.
and now people accuse me of lying or exaggerating. Am I overstating the circumstances?
No, it was pretty dismal. I would say that's accurate. Well, what I would say is that one of the reasons why I felt so compelled to try and find a way forward was that there was a very real community right at the center of this structure, I'll say, that wasn't working, but
Right.
that the community itself was thriving, even in a lot of ways. And I remember feeling very compelled to say, this is a community that deserves to continue to gather. And if that's the case, like if I really truly cannot imagine facing everybody and saying, we can't figure this out, we now have to close.
So
Uh,
you felt a responsibility to a community that already existed.
Absolutely.
Right.
I did. I mean, and a responsibility to grow that community, like that what was happening was important, and that I could tell that it was possible to invite more people who didn't necessarily have a sense of community or home into what was happening. And that felt important to me.
So
Definitely.
talk now about uh, you now essentially try to operate as the church without structure of a physical nature, but you have community and you use buildings that often are empty for a good part of the week as resources, but you're not building centric, you're community centric. And so talk about what that looks like, sounds like, because that's a very different way of everybody thinks you got to have a building and everybody thinks you know, and you've somehow been part of creating something quite different.
Yeah, and I will say that at the beginning when I made this intentional choice to give up a building and to spill out really into the neighborhood or onto the streets, that I could tell that most people thought it wouldn't work. That it wasn't that people wanted it to fail, but they couldn't imagine that it wouldn't.
Right.
And so there were a lot of people standing back waiting for it to fail. I knew at the time of making that decision, I mean, some of it was just out of pure necessity. We didn't have the money to continue to lease the building that we had been for a number of years at this point. And in order to begin to edge forward, we needed to extinguish as much expense as possible. And when I first
what was your budget your first year? When you started to say, okay, I'm now been invited to be the boss. What did you own by way of annual budget?
Well, there were moments when we had less than nothing.
Right. Well, that's the thing I want people to understand, is that this is quite an interesting story where, I've been a bit of an entrepreneur pioneer, but you have been an entrepreneur spiritually in starting, in a sense, a work, or you could call it a business, but it's definitely an organization from scratch, with intensity, passion, but also with the ability to inspire confidence in board members, donors, the community that you serve. So anyway, so you started out, but your annual budget would have been, if you'd had one, you did have
under $100,000.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It was probably like 60 grand or something.
Yes,
so not much.
That's right.
Yeah, so
it was around 60.
Yeah, because I remember, and I'm going, well, because I saw the numbers, and it was like, I wasn't saying it wouldn't work, but I was sure wondering how the dickens it was going to work. How is this bumblebee going to fly?
Yeah, well, because we had only a single donor for so long, and that wasn't really a good way to be sustainable, because that, once that donor needs to back away, which in our case that donor did, then suddenly you're faced with a massive deficit. And then also, by placing at the core people who understand or are dealing with poverty and a number of resulting issues, we weren't going to be sustained based on the tithes or offerings of our people.
No, you needed people like me to catch a vision and hopefully write the odd check or whatever form of economic transaction we use today, because your thing wasn't sustainable from within its own community at that point.
Well, I'll tell you that, like, so I had taken a little time off in order to discern whether or not I was going to step into this new role. And on my first day back, I didn't even have the debit card or anything. I went and I bought some groceries out of my own money, put them in my car, was driving to go to a drop-in. So we always would have a meal as a group of people together. And the phone rings and it's our bank. And I think I should probably answer this. And I pulled over to do that. And the person on the other end said, "I'm not sure if this is who I'm supposed to be speaking to." And I said, "Yes, I am, but I need you to know that I'm just back." And they said, "Are you aware that your account is in overdraft?" And I said, "No, this is my first day back.
Right.
Can you give me an hour and I will get right back to you?" And I got off the phone and I sat there and I thought, is my first day back my last? And then I'd been trying to practice being present to the moment. And I thought, okay, well, in this moment, I have groceries in the back of this car. I have a group of people waiting, thinking that I'm coming back today. Today, we're going to have drop-in. And I made a few phone calls and I spoke with one person and said, this is the situation. And this was a donor. And they said, well, what do you need to get through the next 3 months? And I said, do you really want to know? And they said, yes. And I told them, and they said, okay. And I started to cry. Mm-hmm. And this person said, you don't need to cry. This is just something I can do.
Right.
And I was able to call the bank back, and the rest, has been quite a journey since then.
Right. So if can you describe for me, because even I can't visualize. I mean, I've gone on your website, and so I have a sense that you do have drop-ins and you have gathering, you have instances that people come together in community in different shapes and sizes and forms. So talk about that, because you are now an ordained minister. You are the Reverend ErInn Oxford. I should be much more respectful, obviously, but you do use buildings, but like when people immediately think about, okay, this is a form of church without walls, without traditional structure, but the church does meet around meals and Eucharist and conversation and shared discipline and accountability, and you have all of those ingredients in the Dale. So describe what that looks like, or how that works.
How that works?
Yeah.
So at the beginning, 2 things happened. One was that I started knocking on the doors of buildings around the neighborhood, asking if they had space that was underused and would they be willing to share. The second thing is that we already had a community that was very accustomed to transience. So they understood already what it meant to need to travel around to find resources and so on.
They in a sense were housing insecure, and your community is housing insecure.
That's right. And so this was an opportunity for us to learn from our community. And I would say that what happened, it was very interesting that the community that was already had a sense that this was their place and it was important, what motivated me to keep going, suddenly felt an even deeper sense of connection, responsibility. They were fiercely wanting to protect what still was. And so that was a really important part of the story, that, this was an opportunity to receive from the community.
Because they could teach you some things.
Oh, yes. And I had a lot to learn, and they had a lot to teach me. So buildings started to say yes. And I like to say that what we were able to develop and what we continue to maintain is a nomadic routine. And one of the reasons why it works is that we're in the same place for various things every week. So it's not that we're not nomadic in that people need to guess where we are on any given day.
You're not a floating crap game or something.
That's right.
Identification.
We're very intentional about crafting a routine, I would say. Right. So it's looked different yet again because of COVID. But prior to COVID, a week at the Dale would mean on a Monday, we would gather in a Presbyterian church in their fellowship hall for a drop-in that was centered around a lunch. And in an effort to invite people into full participation of our community, a lot of people were engaged in making that happen. So people were showing up to set up the room, to help with cooking, and to clean up after. And so that was Monday.
These are members of the recipient community.
That's right.
If you were to define it that way, but they're now part of the giving community.
Yeah, I would say sort of our core community is how I would describe it. So members of our core community, very much a part of making that happen. Then Tuesday we would have, I began to carry my office in my bag right at the beginning of my time in this role. And then we would meet in a local coffee shop that was generous in letting us sit there for a good length of time. And or we would meet in my vehicle. So my vehicle became sort of office, you know, it, so many different things. We would store things. It was a storage room. It was an office. It was a check-in station. It was all of these things. Then we would meet. We would have a smaller drop-in at the back of a Salvation Army thrift store, which sounds like it wouldn't work, but they had developed what they called a coffee corner. So it was at the back of the store, was where they kept their books. There were some couches, tables, a sink. So we could put on coffee. We would play Scrabble together, you know, sort of connect in a way that maybe the larger gathering on a Monday wouldn't allow. On Wednesday, we would do a lot of walking around our neighborhood, outreach, pastoral care, visiting people in hospital. That was sprinkled around the week, but Wednesday was some of that. There was a Bible study that we held at, for the longest time, in a coffee time in one of those old smoking rooms, right? When they first, when they were first dividing where people could smoke, and then got rid of that altogether, but the room still existed. So we would sit in this room in a coffee time and do Bible study. And we would also do an art and breakfast drop-in at a health center on Thursdays, and then be in yet another building on Sundays for our Sunday service. So that's what it looks like. It looks a little different again, though, now, I will say.
Yeah, and now you have a number of staff, and you've got a pretty solid board. So what do you do in terms of now office and administration and all that sort of stuff? Do you have at least a hole in the wall where you can park your bag for the day, or?
Yeah, I'm sitting in the hole in the wall right now, actually. So when the pandemic hit, so in March of 2020, all of our partner buildings, with the exception of one, shut down to us.
Right.
Not just us, to everything.
Yeah.
And the one building that remained open to us was an Anglican church building that we were maybe ironically homeless out of. It was the building that we originally gave up space in.
Right. I remember that.
And now this is full circle.
Yeah.
Now they are the ones still offering us hospitality in a sense. And so it became the spot where we were doing all of our food prep, all of our meal times turned into meals to go. So they allowed us to do prep for those meals, have some storage. And along the way, there was a little room that used to be a choir room that they offered for us to use as an office. I don't know that it's ours forever. I think at some point it will end up being renovated into something else. But for now, we do have a spot. And it was a big deal to be able to have a place to hang our hats and have a printer. That was a glorious day. And we could finally have a printer.
I mean, it is interesting, the things that we, what would the Apostle Paul have done if he had, not had all the different devices that we have? But you have operated pretty lean and mean, and obviously worked hard. When you talk about your experience of incarnational ministry, you really do believe Jesus is in you, he's in your community, and doing puzzles or playing Scrabble in the back of a Sally Ann thrift shop is as spiritual an activity as singing a hymn or saying a prayer, and that somehow it all becomes kingdom of God stuff. Is that fair to say?
Yes. Yeah, I think, often people will say to me, well, are you church or are you mission? Like they want to make that distinction. And my response is always, yes. that,
Absolutely.
that I
Whatever,
don't.
whatever you want me to be, I'll be. It's no problem. Just
Yeah,
spend money.
that's right.
If you
But
give
yeah,
to the church, well, then we're church.
yes, that's right. Yeah, I don't see the necessity to make that distinction. I
Right.
really think those two things are like there's no way to untangle them.
See, like
And
we get the I've been at this 38 and a half years or whatever, and people there are people who have been part of Touchstone forever, and they'll say it's my church, and they'll say, I know Norm doesn't want me to say that because
oh,
I don't
interesting.
want to define ourselves as church. I do define ourselves as serving the church in its dispersal. Now,
Mm-hmm.
you, in a sense, are the church in its dispersal and gathering all at the same time. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's an interesting thing because we have this sense of church as gathered when in fact the church is always the church whether we're visible or not. And so it's in a sense you're finding the best of all options in a sense.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, we have a community member, a core community member who often likes to remind me that we are living stones, that we are the church. It's never been the building. And
Right.
I think that's been a really good reminder along the way that we haven't needed walls in order to consider ourselves church.
Right.
And that's a big shift for most people, I would say,
Yeah.
no matter what side of the street, as you described, people are on, right? Like there's
Yeah.
this sense that this is what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, I mean,
And
like you hear all the time from people, well, nobody from the church visited me when I was A, B, or C. And then
yeah,
I'll say, but what about so and so? Didn't they come and bring you a casserole or didn't they come to, oh, yeah. Well, aren't they part of your congregation? Oh, yeah, but the minister didn't come. And I'm going, wait a minute. The church came,
yeah,
your friends came. But
that's
anyway,
right. And
that's
we
just
and
that's
we
just my
do
old bitter
it.
soul speaking out. So, so you've been 10 years now, Dale, the Dale?
Yeah, so I gave up the building in at the beginning of 2012,
Right.
and now we're into 2023. So yeah, we've officially been around for a decade, which amazes me. And as you say, we've grown. I have a team now. Went from being just me to a team of four and a community that continues to grow and meet and all of
Right.
those things.
I
And
mean,
a really strong board.
I remember there was a point where I got really discouraged after year one of Touchstone,
Mm,
and I went to see a friend of mine who's a United Church minister here in town and a dear friend, still is. And I said, I think I've made a terrible mistake, and I should probably go to seminary and get a real, get ordained and be a real minister. And he looked at me and he says, when you say that, something in my soul dies. Don't even think about it. And we had no money. I remember I couldn't pay for parking. I didn't know if I was going to have enough money to get home with gas. I mean, it was, we were operating fairly rudimentary. And that's why I have such respect for what you've done. And yet you suddenly go, okay, well, this is the price you had groceries in your car and you were going to have drop in, even though you had no way of recovering the expenditure. And you had made that decision before you called to find the provision that did actually come. And so, in a sense, you had your own little wilderness test about, is this worth doing
mhm.
and paying a price for? Now, when you look forward, you've got a little bit more security. You've got some structure in terms of organizational structure. What are the hopes and dreams of the Dale community? What are your dreams in terms of as you look forward for the next 10 years or whatever?
Well, sometimes people ask me, would you get a building if you could? Like, is that part of the dream?
Or
If you had,
build a prayer tower, maybe.
yeah, something like that. And I still am quite convinced that I would say no. I think that the way that we function now uh, means that there are buildings that have been underused that are being used. It means that we inhabit our neighborhood in a really unique way. And I think that if anything, I see us, I don't know that I ever even imagine us getting massive as an organization. Um, I could see us growing further than we are right now because there's no shortage of need
Right.
as a community for any of us in
Now,
it.
you must have pockets of people within your community that gather on a Tuesday, but may not see the people on Thursday at the back of the Sally Ann thing. So it's not that you can't create other pods of influence or mutual care or whatever. Like, it's not
Right.
like everybody's got to be in the same room all the time for your thing to work, right?
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of freedom because of that. We can be really imaginative about additional programming. I think it also, like if we were to grow as a staff, for instance, I think it just provides more opportunity for people to be visited, people to be, all those different
Right.
things that we do. And so I
Your dream is just stay the course.
I think it is. I think my dream is. Yeah. And that there's real beauty in existing in this community. I think there are additional opportunities maybe right now as we become better known for what we're doing. There are more opportunities for us to tell our story more broadly and not to go into another community and do it for them, but to say, this could be a way that
Right.
you do something in your neighborhood, or if not without a building, the you know teaching people more about focusing on relationship,
Right.
about the beauty that is present in people who have very felt needs, that we have a common humanity and that we're not actually that different from each other. And so what can we learn from each other when we get together? And what
Well, I
can we
mean,
learn about Jesus?
yeah, and it's something that, I mean, that when I first met Dion, he was in a course that Tobias had me teach once a year to his theologues that were supposedly seeing urban ministry. So they were going from mission to mission. And then I'd have them in a boardroom to talk about Touchstone. And that, sometimes would have them fairly, irritated until they found out actually we were not that different from the people that they thought they were going to go out and serve. Anyway, Dion was in one of those meetings and he was a bit cranky at the beginning, as he's been known to be. But near the end,
True.
he stands up and says, "Can I use your mission statement for the work that I'm doing at the Friendship Room?" And he wanted to take our mission statement, which is offer, encourage, and teach friendship in Christ among leaders in the blah 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 community.
Yes.
And he wanted to turn it into offering, encouraging, teaching friendship in Christ among people of the street or whatever it was he wanted to do. So it's like there was a synergy between what he and I were doing. We knew it was different, and I feel the same way about you. Like, you obviously you're a friend of Susan and me as well, but I feel a synergy with what you're doing because it's not dissimilar to what I've had to do for a long time. And so I just, I encourage you and admire you for the sort of the determination you have
Oh,
to just do the job. And you get up in the morning and put one foot in the front of the other, and that's faith. And you know, and so there's huge value in staying in one place for a long time. I mean, I've been around the game a long time, and Tobias had been around a long time, and there were, Greg Paul and all the people who are my friends, Jake at Friendship, Dion, and there were an awful lot of people who came and went.
mm-hmm.
There weren't many people who were present in the community that they were called to serve for 30 years or 20 years. And you gain a lot of trust, of accessibility, of every kind of thing if you just stay there. And so, I don't know
Mm-hmm.
what you think about that, but is that part of what you feel in terms of your dream?
Yes. Yeah, I would say I was in a meeting not too long ago with some other sort of executives, I'll say. And the conversation was about, when is it appropriate to leave? And we were talking about how important it is to talk about the context that you're working in. Because while maybe that's true for some people, that it would be appropriate to leave after X amount of years,
Right.
that I notice that it's important to stay, and that the depth of relationship that's built, the level of trust that is formed, is all so important. And I haven't yet heard or gotten the sense that I need to leave this place.
Right.
I think
And
I
I
need to.
and I hope you stay at it. I mean, obviously, it's up. Whatever the good God puts on your heart will be what is put on your heart. And so, it's great to chat. Excuse me. I look forward to seeing where the Dale Ministries and you go. We will have contact information on the screen, because if you follow ErInn on LinkedIn or anywhere, her blog posts are always beautifully written and very poignant in their content. And there will be ways for you to connect with her by email or to the website of the Dale if you're interested in further conversations with her. So let me just offer an old Benedictine blessing, which you probably heard me use before, but it's one of my favorites, and I think it's appropriate for you. May God bless you with a restless discomfort about easy answers, half truths, and superficial relationships, so that you may seek truth boldly and love deep within your heart. May God bless you with holy anger at injustice, oppression, and exploitation of people, so that you may tirelessly work for justice, freedom, and peace among all people. May God bless you with the gift of tears to shed with those who suffer from pain, rejection, starvation, or the loss of all that they cherish, so that you may reach out your hand to comfort them and transform their pain into joy. May God bless you with enough foolishness to believe that you really can make a difference in this world, so that you are able, with God's grace, to do what others claim cannot be done. And the blessing of God, the supreme majesty, and our Creator, Jesus Christ, the incarnate Word, who is our brother and Savior, and the Holy Spirit, our active advocate and guide, be with you and remain with you this day and forevermore. Amen.